All right, future civil servants, back for another deep dive into the current affairs you need to know to H that UPSC exam.
February 14th, 2025, Part 1 of our daily rundown.
So if you're a dedicated listener, some of this might sound familiar from yesterday, but we'll be looking at things from some fresh new angles.
And for all the newcomers, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to get your daily dose of in-depth current affairs analysis.
Okay, let's kick things off with India's energy future. Natural gas is playing a bigger and bigger role, right?
Definitely. It's really interesting, actually. India's gas consumption is set to increase dramatically.
Dramatically, like how much?
By 2030, we're looking at a 60% jump.
Wow, 60%. So I guess this isn't just some random statistic. Why such a huge increase?
It's all part of the government's push for cleaner energy. They've set a target to increase natural gas's share in our energy mix to 15% by 2030. As India continues to develop and industrialize, our energy needs are going to keep growing.
And natural gas is seen as a cleaner alternative to coal. Makes sense. But where is all this gas coming from? Are we producing enough domestically?
Well, that's where things get a bit tricky. We have domestic production, but India is already the fourth largest importer of LNG globally. And those imports, they're projected to more than double by 2030.
That raises some red flags for me. I mean, becoming so reliant on imports makes us vulnerable, right? What happens if there are global supply disruptions or, crazy price fluctuations?
Exactly. It's a major concern for energy security. We can't control those external factors.
It links to international relations and geopolitics, too, which, as we know, is always a hot topic for the UPSC. It's not enough to just focus on what's happening within India. We need to understand how global events impact us.
Absolutely. And on that note, even domestically, the gas sector has its own set of challenges. Pricing issues, GAIL's dominant position, and the lack of underground gas storage. These are all hurdles we need to overcome.
Okay, let's break that down a bit. What are the pricing issues exactly, and how are they impacting the growth of the sector?
Well, right now, different gas fields have different pricing mechanisms.
So it's not a unified system.
No, and that creates distortions in the market and can discourage investment.
So we need a more streamlined approach.
The report suggests moving towards liberalized pricing, letting market forces determine gas prices.
Okay, so more free market economics. But how would that impact the average consumer? Would it mean higher gas prices for households?
That's a valid concern. We need to consider those social and economic impacts carefully.
Because higher gas prices could hurt consumers, but I guess it could also incentivize domestic production. So less reliance on those imports we were talking about.
It's a trade-off for sure. Finding that balance is crucial.
All right, and what about this dominant role of GAIL? Why is that a problem for the sector?
GAIL, as it stands, controls a significant portion of the gas pipeline infrastructure in India, which stifles competition and innovation.
So a lack of competition, classic economics problem.
The report recommends unbundling GAIL, separating its transmission and distribution functions.
To level the playing field.
Precisely. Create a more competitive market.
And finally, what's the deal with these underground gas storage facilities? Why are they so important?
Think of them as a safety net, like strategic reserves, but for natural gas.
Like those strategic oil reserves, we have to guard against supply disruption.
Exactly. It helps cushion the impact of any unexpected shortages.
So it's not just about producing and importing gas, it's about managing it strategically. Okay, moving on, let's talk about palm oil. It's a hot topic lately. Why is that?
Well, India's palm oil imports have plummeted.
Plummeted? Like how low are we talking?
A 14-year low.
Whoa, 14 years. That's a pretty significant drop. Are Indians suddenly using less oil in their cooking?
Haha, well, changing dietary habits could be a factor, but it's probably not the main driver. This decline is likely due to a mix of things: global price trends, availability of cheaper alternatives like soy oil.
So the global market is at play here.
Always. Even seemingly simple commodities like palm oil are connected to these complex global supply chains.
True. And what does this mean for India's own palm oil production? Is the government doing anything to boost domestic production?
They are. In 2021, they launched the National Mission on Edible Oils, oil palm. The acronym is NMEO.
NMEO, got it.
It's all about increasing domestic oil palm cultivation.
Aiming for self-sufficiency.
Exactly. Reducing our reliance on those imports.
It's interesting how this palm oil story is about so much more than just imports and prices. It touches upon government policy, agricultural practices, and maybe even, as you said, changing dietary habits. Okay, let's shift gears now to something a little more abstract but equally important for UPSC aspirants. The line between freedom of expression and obscenity.
It's a tricky one. It's about understanding those legal and ethical dimensions, something that any future administrator needs to grapple with.
So how do we even begin to define obscenity in legal terms? It seems so subjective. What might be offensive to one person might be perfectly acceptable to another.
You're right, it is subjective. It's what makes it so challenging. Legally, it usually refers to an expression that's indecent, whether it's words, images, or actions.
But the word indecent itself is so open to interpretation. How do our courts even navigate this?
There have been some landmark cases that provide some guidance. The Avik Sarkar case, for example.
Remind me about that one.
The Supreme Court acknowledged that community standards of obscenity can differ. What's considered obscene in one place might not be seen the same way in another.
Context matters.
Absolutely. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. And then there's the whole debate about censorship and artistic freedom.
Yeah, that adds another layer of complexity.
The Makbul Fida Hussein case is a good example of that. Nudity in art, the court ruled, isn't automatically obscene. It's about protecting artistic expression while being sensitive to societal norms. It's a tough balancing act.
It must be. And it gets even trickier in today's digital age, right? The case we discussed yesterday, the YouTube influencer under investigation for allegedly obscene remarks. The internet has just amplified the reach and impact of potentially offensive content.
Definitely complicates things. The legal landscape is constantly evolving to keep up.
So UPSC aspirants need to be aware of these evolving laws. But it's not just about the legal aspects, right? What about the broader social implications? How do we balance free speech with the need to protect people from harm?
It's a question we constantly grapple with as a society.
Okay, let's move on to a more concrete partnership now, one that's unfolding on the international stage. India and France seem to be getting closer.
Yes. The Prime Minister's recent visit to France was actually his 6th official visit. It really highlights the growing strategic partnership between the two countries.
6th visit, that's significant. So what came out of this visit? Any major agreements signed?
There were several. One of the big ones was collaboration on nuclear energy, specifically for developing SMRs and AMRs.
SMRs and AMRs? Wait, what are those again?
Small modular reactors and advanced modular reactors. Think of them as the next generation of nuclear technology.
Okay, but why should a UPSC aspirant care about SMRs and AMRs? How does this tie into India's development goals?
Well, India needs energy, and lots of it. We have a rapidly growing population and economy.
And we need reliable sources to fuel that growth.
Exactly. And SMRs and AMRs offer a potential solution. They're designed to be safer, more efficient, and can be deployed in more locations than traditional reactors.
Interesting. So it's not just about nuclear energy, it's about technological advancement and even climate change mitigation.
All very relevant for the UTSC, absolutely.
What else came out of this India-France partnership? Anything beyond nuclear energy?
Definitely. They also launched the India-France Indo-Pacific Trilateral Development Cooperation.
That's a mouthful. What's that all about?
Essentially, they'll be working together to promote sustainable development in the Indo-Pacific region, addressing things like climate change and maritime security.
So it's a regional partnership as well?
It's a perfect example of India putting its Act East policy into action.
And by partnering with France, which has its own interests in the Indo-Pacific.
India is strengthening its presence and influence in the region.
It's all about strategic partnerships in a multipolar world.
And countering China's growing assertiveness, too.
Okay, so there's a lot of geopolitics at play here, all very relevant for UPSC aspirants. What about defense cooperation? I vaguely remember something about Scorpene submarines.
You're right. The ongoing construction of Scorpene submarines in India using French technology is a big part of their defense partnership. And they also launched the Friend X platform.
Friend X, what's that?
It's a platform to promote collaboration between Indian and French defense and aerospace startups.
So it's about fostering innovation and building those indigenous defense capabilities. Okay, now for a topic that's a bit closer at home and unfortunately all too common in Indian politics, the criminalization of politics. The fact that almost half of the elected MPs in 2024 have criminal cases pending against them is, well, it's alarming to say the least.
It is a serious issue that undermines the very foundation of our democracy. When individuals with criminal backgrounds hold public office, it erodes public trust.
And it can lead to a culture of impunity, right?
Exactly, where the law doesn't seem to apply to those in power.
It discourages good people from entering politics. But why does this trend persist? Why do we keep electing candidates with criminal backgrounds?
There are a few reasons. The influence of money and muscle power during elections is a big one. Weak law enforcement, a lack of political will to actually tackle the problem.
It's a vicious cycle. But are there any solutions in sight? I mean, what can be done to address this?
Well, the judiciary has made some attempts to fix this. Landmark judgments like the ADR case in 2002, the Lily Thomas case in 2013, and the Public Interest Foundation case in 2019 all sought to address this.
So they've tried to increase transparency and accountability.
Yes. mandating the disclosure of criminal records, disqualifying convicted lawmakers, pushing political parties to be more upfront about the criminal records of their candidates. These were all steps in the right direction.
It's a start, but it seems like we have a long way to go. What about the role of citizens in all of this? What can we do to demand better from our elected representatives?
We need to be more informed and engaged citizens. We need to hold our elected officials accountable, demand stricter enforcement of laws, and create a culture where we simply don't tolerate criminal elements in politics.
It's a call to action for all citizens, not just those aspiring for the UPSC. Now let's talk about another contentious issue, one that always sparks debate, the issue of freebies.
The age-old question, are they a boon or a bane for India's development?
Especially during election season, this debate gets pretty heated.
It does.
Are they a genuine tool for social welfare, or are they just vote-buying schemes? It's tough to say.
It is a complex issue. There are valid arguments on both sides. Freebies can provide crucial support to those in need, alleviating poverty, improving living standards.
So they can uplift the most vulnerable sections of society.
Yes, and even boost consumption, which in turn can stimulate the economy.
So there's a strong social justice argument there.
There is, but on the flip side,
The economic concerns.
exactly. Critics worry about the strain on government finances.
Especially with so many other development needs competing for funds.
Right, and they can create a culture of dependency, which might hurt economic growth in the long run.
Plus, there are potential environmental concerns, like free electricity leading to unsustainable groundwater extraction for irrigation.
Exactly.
So it's all about finding that sweet spot, right? Balancing the need for social welfare with responsible economic and environmental management.
Absolutely. It's a nuanced debate. We need to design and implement welfare schemes thoughtfully.
Moving beyond those simple labels of freebies versus development.
It's about empowering people, not just giving handouts.
A debate that every UPSC aspirant should be prepared to engage with. Now, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's give a quick rapid-fire round of some other key developments that you should be aware of.
Ready to test your knowledge?
Always. First up, we have Mission Amrit Sarovar. This initiative has been making waves, literally by rejuvenating and constructing thousands of ponds across the country. It's a great example of a government program that addresses a critical need, water scarcity, in a sustainable and community-driven way. Next, we have the Paris 2 spectrograph, a state-of-the-art instrument developed by Indian scientists that has led to the discovery of a new, dense exoplanet.
A testament to India's growing capabilities in space exploration and astronomical research.
Pretty impressive. Now, let's bring it back down to earth with a fisheries survey of India, which has discovered new fishing grounds in the Arabian Sea.
Good news for the fishing industry, but it also underscores the need for sustainable management of our marine resources.
Balance is key. Now, for a development that highlights the crucial role of accountability and governance, the Public Accounts Committee, or PAC, has recommended a review of toll tax rules on national highways.
Ensuring transparency and fairness in how public funds are collected and used is paramount.
Agreed. Now, for a topic that often sparks debate, there's controversy surrounding a proposed tribal village in the buffer zone of the Brahmagiri Wildlife Sanctuary.
It raises those tough questions about balancing development needs with the protection of our natural heritage.
Finding that middle ground is never easy. Speaking of delicate balances, the BrahMos NG missile, a next-generation supersonic cruise missile, jointly developed by India and Russia, is slated for its maiden flight test in 2026.
A significant boost for India's defense capabilities.
Showing off India's growing technological prowess. Now for a glimpse into the future of connectivity, Bhutan has embraced SpaceX's Starlink satellite internet service. It's fascinating to see how technology can bridge the digital divide, even in remote mountainous regions. However, this raises questions for India about data security and national sovereignty.
Allowing a foreign company to provide internet services has its own set of challenges and considerations.
Definitely. Now for a stark reminder of the challenges we face. The Climate Risk Index for 2025 ranks India as the 6th most affected country globally. It underscores the urgent need to address climate change and build resilience to extreme weather events. And finally, let's take a moment to remember Maharishi Dayanand Saraswati, a remarkable social reformer whose birth anniversary was recently commemorated.
His contributions to religious and social reform movements in India continue to inspire us today. And we're back for part 2 of our deep dive, folks, still with you on this February 14th, 2025.
All right, let's pick up where we left off. We were talking about Maharishi Dayanand Saraswati and his incredible contributions to social reform in India. His ideas were way ahead of their time.
Absolutely, a true visionary. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about a development that highlights the crucial role of financial oversight in governance. The Public Accounts Committee, or as it's better known, the PAC.
The PAC, what have they been up to?
They've recently recommended the review of the toll tax rules on national highways.
Interesting. So they're looking into whether those toll charges are actually justified, if they're being implemented fairly?
Exactly. It's about transparency and accountability, making sure that public funds are being used efficiently and for their intended purpose.
And infrastructure financing is a big deal, especially for a developing country like India.
Absolutely. We need to ensure those funds are being used wisely.
Okay, now let's move on to a topic that always seems to spark a debate. Development versus conservation. We're talking about the controversy surrounding the proposed tribal village in the buffer zone of the Brahmagiri Wildlife Sanctuary.
This is a tough one. It raises those difficult questions about how we balance the needs of local communities with the imperative to protect our environment.
The Brahmagiri Wildlife Sanctuary is home to so much biodiversity.
It is a true treasure. We have endangered species like the lion-tailed macaque that rely on this protected area.
So on the one hand, you have the needs of the tribal community.
Right. They need housing, infrastructure, access to resources.
And on the other hand, you have the potential ecological impact of establishing a village within that buffer zone,
It's about finding that balance, that sustainable solution.
which, as we know, isn't always easy. Okay, speaking of delicate balances, let's talk about the BrahMos NG missile. It's a next-generation supersonic cruise missile developed jointly by India and Russia, and it's getting ready for its first test flight.
This is a big deal for India's defense capabilities.
It's a pretty powerful statement.
Definitely. The BrahMos NG is lighter, smaller, and even more potent than its predecessor. A real game changer.
It shows that India is serious about bolstering its defense capabilities.
And staying ahead in the global arms race.
Okay, shifting gears now to the digital realm. Bhutan has made a bold move by adopting SpaceX's Starlink satellite internet service.
That's a pretty fascinating development. Bhutan, with its challenging terrain, has always struggled with internet connectivity.
Those mountains make it tough to lay down traditional infrastructure.
Exactly. But Starlink, with its constellation of low-Earth orbit satellites, can beam high-speed internet directly to even the most remote areas.
It's amazing how technology can bridge the digital divide like that. But it does raise some questions for India.
It does. We're still deliberating on whether to allow Starlink to operate here.
I can see why. There are concerns about data security, about allowing a foreign company to control such a critical part of our infrastructure.
It's a complex issue with national security implications.
It's not just about getting faster internet, it's about safeguarding our sovereignty in the digital age.
Very true.
Okay, now for a topic that's a sobering reminder of the global challenges we face, the Climate Risk Index.
Right. The 2025 index ranks India as the 6th most affected country globally. It's a wake-up call.
It highlights the urgent need to address climate change, to build resilience to those extreme weather events that are becoming more and more frequent.
We're talking about devastating floods, droughts, heat waves, cyclones. They all take a heavy toll.
Both in terms of human life and economic losses. Okay, now let's talk about something a little more uplifting, a development that showcases India's growing influence on the global stage. India's role in combating antimicrobial resistance, or AMR as it's known.
AMR is a huge threat to global health. It's what happens when bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites become resistant to the drugs we use to treat them.
Creating those superbugs that are so hard to kill.
Exactly, and it's a global problem because these microbes don't respect national borders. They can travel anywhere.
And India, with its large population and high burden of infectious diseases, is particularly vulnerable to AMR.
We are, but we also have a major role to play in tackling this issue.
How so?
Well, for one, India's pharmaceutical industry produces a significant portion of the world's antibiotics. So we have a responsibility to ensure they're used responsibly to prevent the overuse and misuse that leads to drug resistance.
We need to promote responsible prescribing practices.
Absolutely. And we also need to invest in research and development of new antimicrobial drugs to stay ahead of those evolving microbes.
So it's a multi-pronged approach: responsible drug use, innovation in drug development, and international collaboration to share knowledge and best practices. It's a complex issue, but one that India is taking seriously.
It's about global health security, really.
Okay, now let's turn our attention to a topic that's close to the hearts of many UPSC aspirants: education.
Ah, yes, the foundation of a strong nation.
There's been a lot of talk about reforming the education system in India. The National Education Policy 2020, or NEP 2020 as it's often called, aims to bring about some major changes.
It's a landmark document, that's for sure.
It proposes a shift from rote learning to a more holistic approach to education, focusing on critical thinking, creativity, and skill development. A pretty big departure from the traditional exam-centric system.
It is. It's about equipping students with the skills they need for the 21st century. The NEP 2020 introduces some really interesting changes.
Like what?
Well, there's a new curricular structure, a multidisciplinary approach to higher education, a greater emphasis on vocational training and skill development.
It's all about making education more relevant to the needs of the modern world.
Exactly. And harnessing technology, too, through online learning and digital education.
It's a bold vision for the future of education in India. But of course, implementing these reforms effectively will be a challenge.
There will be hurdles, but the NEP 2020 sets a clear direction for the future.
A future where education empowers individuals and strengthens our nation. Now, for a topic that's a constant reminder of the work we still need to do to create a truly just and equitable society, gender inequality.
It's a pervasive issue that cuts across all aspects of life in India.
We've made progress in some areas, like education and women's participation in the workforce, but there's still a long way to go.
There is. We still see significant disparities in economic opportunities, access to healthcare, and political representation.
And violence against women remains a major concern.
Absolutely. Domestic violence, sexual assault, trafficking, these are all horrific realities that we need to confront head on.
It's about changing mindsets, challenging those deep-rooted patriarchal attitudes and social norms that perpetuate gender discrimination.
It's a battle that needs to be fought on multiple fronts, through legal reforms, social awareness campaigns,